Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our unconventional blends tasting. Um, this idea just kind of came about. I think James and I were talking about Compass Box at some point, and it had come up that neither of us had tried the releases from the Pentalogy, which were done for uh, the Maison du Whisky. And this is, I believe, no connection with the Mike Myers film or series that was on Netflix. Bad joke there. But yeah, I've always been a fan of Compass Box. I've been curious to try these. I mean, a lot of them weren't exactly inexpensive, so although they weren't also necessarily insanely expensive on the other hand. But yeah, we just thought about this idea like, why don't we put on a tasting of blends that allows us to try these and then maybe highlight some other things that we have in market that we do have to sell, like the Glenallachie White Heather 21, McNair's 21, the Compass Box Flaming Heart, which I think is getting low. I think you're finally getting low on that
I
one.
think there's two or three cases left now.
Yeah.
So, because
So,
the original cases we got sold out very quick, but then
mhm.
we stole another country's allocation and it kind of snuck under the radar. So
Yeah.
I was very happy to have that around for an extra year though.
Yeah. No, and we took advantage, bought a bunch. And then we thought it'd be fun to put the Cadenhead Enigma blend into the lineup as well. Um, for those who were at the Cadenhead tasting in store, I believe when I asked Cameron about this, he said they genuinely had no idea what was in the blend. They just acquired some blended stock, but often with these 20 something blended sherry cask-esque whiskeys, the immediate suspicion falls on Edrington that it must be something to do with Macallan and Highland Park and Glenturret and Co. So we don't know, but it's fun to speculate or start rumors, especially on a night such as this, where many rumors and speculation and lots of speculating will be taking place. But I'm trying to ignore that. I've got the hockey game playing in the background, so I'm not curious to see what's happening with our giant neighbor to the south of us. I'll save that surprise for the morning. Um, James, any comments, thoughts before we dig into this? Like, I think we're headed into some uncharted territory for most of these.
Yeah, I think how I'm approaching this is like this is how an enthusiast whiskey tasting would have looked in 1931,
Hmm. Yeah, I
right?
mean, there
Like
not have been a lot of single malts, probably.
no, and like just the nature of the strengths and the makeup of these whiskeys is probably what whiskey was like 80, 90 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, and I think maybe accepting the Enigma because we don't know. Like most of these Compass Box whiskeys, the grain is a component; it's not just a filler.
Yeah.
Um, and the blended malts, there probably were quite a few blended malts back in the day. So yeah, this will be fun to dig in. As always, if you have comments, feel free to fire them into the chat questions. If you feel the need to speak and would like to speak, maybe there's that raise your hand feature. I think we're going to be kind of casual on this one, if only because,
It's kind of the nature of the lineup, isn't it?
yeah, it is the nature of the lineup.
Yeah.
But let's start off with a Cadenhead Enigma 25, uh, which I'll put up on the screen here. I think we've still got a little bit of this. We jumped on a bunch of this when it came in, partly because the price. How often do you get to buy 25-year-old whiskey for $140 these days? Um, I also quite like this packaging that they've done for the Enigma range at
Yeah.
Cadenheads. Some people will know that there was some other releases that came out through this. I believe they did a Campbellton blended malt last year. Um, there's some other things like there's a God help me out here, James. What do we call Balvenie?
Um,
Burnside. There's a
Burnside, thank you. I
Burnside
was gonna say
coming.
Warhead, but that's
No, that's the other one.
Glenmo, isn't it?
So I don't know. I kind of dig this packaging. I'll be honest. I think I like it better than the regular Cadenhead bottles. We don't know much about it. It's 41.4%. It's 25 years of age. Based on the color, I think we can, and the nose, we can safely assume we've got some sherry influence here. So that's where we're kicking things off. If you think the whiskeys are out of order, you can take that up with Evan. Um, he took responsibility for that earlier today because other people's were busy. Jeff apparently forgot his bottles at the store despite being in town this weekend. That is a bummer, Jeff, but you can still fact check as we go along here. So James, what do you think about the nose? The nose has got some nice kind of hallmark, like sherry cask notes to it, some nice chocolate fruits. There's a
Yeah,
honey note.
kind
Go
of
ahead.
whispers a little bit, doesn't it? I mean, there is some good complexity there. Like there are some notes that are older.
Hmm.
Um, it doesn't scream like big depth necessarily, but
It's
it's
very pleasant.
intriguing. It's
No off notes.
Yeah, that's I was gonna say that was the big takeaway is that
I mean, a lot of these stocks, which were, if this is what we think it is, which is like Edrington pre-blended stock, I mean, they are pretty consistent. Um, Presumably things like Macallan, Highland Park. The cool part about the Highland Park element in there, at least for this one, is I do get quite a prominent honey note and just a little wisp of smoke in there. So who knows? Fun.
well, the thing I always assume when I see something like this that's older and low strength is, and again, this makes me think of old school whiskey, which is, you've got these old casks that kind of never come around
Mhm.
and you just water them down and then they become drinkable. And it
Oh,
kind of disguises maybe some of the faults, right?
man, the palate on this is extremely drinkable. And this is to me, this tastes like an old school whiskey. The one note in there that I'm surprised by how prominent it is the smoke. Like it's not heavily peated, but there's this nice clean smoke element in there
Yes.
that's actually quite firm.
Yeah, the other thing that strikes me is that are we assuming this is chill filtered or do we know?
That's a good question.
I wonder if it's maybe not.
Well, unless
Because
our fact
I don't know,
checker,
doesn't it strike you as being kind of buttery on the palate? Like it's got some nice texture.
it is, but I mean, it's kind of, I don't know, to me, that's almost like an old bottle effect note, like a really
Right.
oxidative note.
Yeah.
Um, so it could be, but like, I don't know, I'd be shocked if Cadenhead would chill filter something. I'm just pulling up their bottle on whiskey base, the back
Yeah.
label, non-chill
That says
filter.
no.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, Jeff's theory probably has a lot of merit. If you were gonna spin the wheel of what happened here, that seems like a pretty valid guess.
yeah. Well, I mean, keep in mind too, if they're blending these things, like maybe they did proof it down because they were thinking about putting this into a release. I mean,
Yeah.
that's something we don't talk about very often, but if you've got something at cast strength and you want to bring it down to 40 or 43 or 46 for bottling, you can't do that. You can't just dump in the quantity of
No.
water you need. You need to do it slowly over time. So it could be that like maybe there was some proofing down, knowing that this was going to go in a certain direction. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but like early in my career, Famous Grouse was coming out with like age statement bottlings, like 25, 30, and I think there might have even been a 40. And my kind of suspicion a long time ago was a lot of this stuff is stuff that was possibly being pre-vatted and prepared to go into these ranges, and then they didn't do them. It's not just necessarily trying to get rid of stock that they can't sell, which I think is also a reality when it comes to the Edrington Group and some of their brands. But they're this pre-vatted blended malts and you know matured blends in cask. They were probably intending to do something with them, and then they changed their mind.
Yeah, I was gonna say it does feel like just, you compare it to something like, the Gordon MacPhail distillery labels where they basically have casks that are like predestined for this certain product. This seems more
Doug's
like
baiting you there, James. There's a little bit of baiting.
um this feels a little bit more like maybe it was like in the lab this was kind of created based on
Mhm.
just what was there. That would be my guess. Not that that's better or worse.
It well, back to the whiskey. I think it's pretty decent, like especially for the price.
Yeah.
Um,
Which by the way, that's how much a whiskey like this should cost,
yeah, it is.
right?
I mean, it's funny to you mentioned that because you're right. Like, it's funny. We've seen some comments lately about pricing, and our American cast, which came in, which was still a little higher than maybe I would have liked, but they worked with us to get it to a point where I thought we could sell it. And people are saying, wow, that price is great. They brought their single cast prices down. And like, I think consumers are recognizing that and will put their money behind things where they feel they're getting value. And we are approaching a point where, for especially stuff 15 and under, a lot of the industry is sitting on stock. So I don't think they can make the argument much longer.
At every point in the
Yeah.
distribution chain, there is extra stock sitting around.
Yeah. So I think that those are conversations to be had. But, the last thing I would say about this is I've had the chance to try some old whiskeys over the years, and this doesn't quite taste like, say, a blend from 40 years ago that's been oxidizing in the bottle. But I think this is the closest you can get to something like that for people who've never had that
I was going to
experience.
say, what it reminds me a lot of is those 43% signatory bottlings from the early days.
Mm,
They released a lot of whiskey that tasted just like this in those bottles.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was like low ABV. It was like pretty oxidized. Usually was like refill.
Mm-hmm.
The Sith Lord of Edrington.
Ah, yes, the Sith Lord of Edrington. Well, on that note, maybe we should wander into the first Compass Box balling.
Now let's talk about philosophy now, because that's the theme of the next four whiskeys.
Okay. Well, I mean, in some ways, I think Hunter might be well disposed to add some comments on that because
Yeah,
uh,
if there's anyone on the chat here that is like an expert on Aristotle, I think this is like the moment that you've been waiting for like the last 2 decades.
the funny thing is, I did have a customer who I think at one point in time would have been, he was a PhD in geology, but I remember he came over to my house one time and he was obsessed with my copies of like ancient Greek and Roman books, like in
Yeah,
translation. And I'm sure he'd read them all like front to back several times over, but still had to leaf through them. Like he
right. My
definitely
guess
would have
is the
been.
percentage of the population that knows more than they care to admit about like Greek history or just mythology or philosophy or whatever is probably higher than you would think.
Well, the Greek and Roman history, I think, is because I think men of a certain persuasion at a certain age harken back to the past. And I will suggest I am one of those people. I do love listening to podcasts about Rome or Persia or ancient Greece,
100%. You remember
probably
the
because you can't
HBO
control the
show?
present. So,
Yeah.
um,
No,
yeah,
it's a thing. It's a
the
thing.
philosophy side of things I've not delved quite that deep into. But
Yeah.
if Evan was on here, whether he's taught as one, he is a bit of a stoic, and I'm sure could at least have commented on that. But I don't believe this range has anything to do with stoicism. So,
No, totally. Yeah, no, I mean, we've done tastings in this format before with James Saxon from Compass Box, who
mhm,
I have no doubt is like has probably read like the original Aristotle in the actual Greek. Like he
yeah,
just seems like that type, doesn't he?
he does.
Yeah,
And I mean, to his credit, I mean, I think he's also one of those guys who can do the job that he does and still find time to continue his study and indulgence in, you know, Greek,
yeah.
classic Greek philosophy. I don't know that you could be such a person with ADD. I think you need an incredible amount of patience and to be able to sit still in order to get deep into that sort of thing. But so the first one we've got here, blended grain Scotch whiskey of lowland grains, 51.9%. What else do we know about this? Generosity reveals enthralling medicinal, fruity, herbaceous notes. That's all in the tasting notes. Created by James Saxon. This was done for La Maison du Whisky a number of years ago. Um, and the names of each of these whiskeys are inspired by Aristotelian philosophy, encourages finding the right balance of virtue and the rejection of all excesses. That's maybe the one thing here that probably like, is this not an excess in itself? Like enjoying in,
It's a good question. I mean, you could argue that if you look historically at Compass Box whiskey, something I always kind of explain to people is, it's rare that you get a Compass Box whiskey that kind of yells and shouts and has excess. In fact, that's why I always saw it like No Name 1. from Compass Box is like the only thing they've released that isn't a Compass Box whiskey because it yells and shouts. Everything else they release tends to be harmonious,
Hmm.
like it has a sense of elegance always.
Hmm.
And
Well, and
like I think James has taken it even more in that direction.
yeah, well, that's a fair point, and I think when I talked about Compass Box and their philosophy on blending, and one of the things that I really loved about it, and maybe misunderstood, there was a period in my life where I would certainly not be as charitable to blends as I should be, but it was because I think the industry had moved to a point where it was very like industrial, it was very homogenous, and you know they were using the grain not to add character, but just really to be there to add a base to blend on top of. And Compass Box's philosophy has always been that the grain is a part of it, and it has to add something to it. And in this case, we've got something that's just a straight blended grain, effectively a hedonism, if you will. And yeah, what do we think about this?
Well, the first thing I'm struck by is when you nose older grains and they don't have an acetone note to them, that to
Mm.
me is very exciting.
And yet, well, I mean, I guess you can see a bit on the palate, but
Yeah, usually though you get that hint on the nose, though, right? Where you kind of are like, oh, that almost like volatile kind of character.
I mean, even on the palate, it's interesting because there is a little bit of a medicinal note there. There's actually quite a prominent one, but it's almost like the layer of like cling wrap on top of a whole tray of like fruits, like
Mm.
sliced fruits ready to eat. Um, it's like once that pulls back, you get these nice decadent, creamy caramel tones, loads of fruit. It's very soft.
Yeah, it has some like very kind of savory, spicy notes to it as well. Like it kind of tingles on the palate in a nice way, which I usually think good grain whiskey does.
Mhm.
But sometimes it can be like hot, and the strength here is just absolutely perfect.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's any coincidence that this range was done for La Maison du Whisky.
Yeah.
I can see this being an idea that James had that maybe he pitched to John and was not something that he really felt would have traction more broadly.
Yeah.
But I mean, who else would get excited about this than maybe Parisians? Like, hey, we're going to do a range of bespoke blends for you based on and inspired by philosophy.
Right. Well, my critique of the Extinct Blends Quartet, which all four of those are wonderful,
Hmm.
but it does feel like even for Compass Box, like the ideas and the blends themselves are a bit like over the top. It's like you kind of have to be deep in the game to really appreciate those in some sense. And this is even like further in that
Hmm.
direction.
Well, I think the shame with that range, and maybe it's not being fully appreciated, is that it's difficult to get people excited about something that's trying to replicate something they probably can't try. And I
Yeah, that's
mean,
interesting.
because I remember being in the blending lab with James and chatting with him about it and the last release that was coming out. And I wanted to take a photo of the new, like the final release Celestial next to the bottle that inspired it. And he's like, no, please don't do that. And I was like, why? I mean, in some ways, I think they did that range a disservice by not begging for maybe permission or forgiveness to like actually show people what it's like. Instead, they kind of danced around what they.
Right. Well, you can still buy White Horse in the UK, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and in fact, we tried one that was an older bottling, not too old, but an older bottling of it as a comparable. But yeah, I think, I mean, it's an interesting concept where you want to recreate these styles and show people what blends used to taste like, but then be very cheeky about or very discreet about what it was you were trying to replicate. Like, I think
Mhm.
that's probably where the idea for me might have lost its traction with some consumers.
Yeah, my gut is that Extinct Blends Quartet, and I would argue these as well, this set, that like long term they'll be looked at very fondly because
Mhm.
like clearly they are the result of kind of high quality juice that just didn't have an obvious home elsewhere.
Hmm. Um, anyone else getting like, do you remember back in the 80s and 90s when you'd go to the dentist and they would fill those fluoride cups to put on your teeth? This reminds me of the moment before they put the fluoride cups on your teeth when you nose it. I always asked for plain. They're like, what flavor do you want? And I'm like, look, you're gonna almost make me gag, so I want no flavor. Like, let's go with let's not create a bad memory for some sort of flavor by making me gag with bubble gum or vanilla in my mouth.
I know now they do that thing where they like paint with a Q-tip on your teeth as if somehow that's an improvement.
Mhm. It is kind of fun though, the texture that leaves behind though for like the next couple of hours. It's almost like you got a layer of like thin rubber on your teeth. Should we move on to wisdom?
Yeah,
So
that's a win for me though. That generosity, like,
yeah.
I mean, I almost think I like that more than
Uh-oh.
Hedonism 2024, but
Those are bold words, James.
I know. It's also that hedonism is $100 less, to be fair.
To be fair. And remind me, I think we have that. Yeah, we have that coming up in a future tasting.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? 2 weeks or 2 weeks from today. If you don't have your kit for that, it is sold out, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, would you describe this as being more generous than the hedonism 2024?
No, I would say it's less generous.
Oh.
So yeah, a little bit of irony there, but I don't know. This is just the type of grain whiskey that I love, which is
Mhm,
it like has all the elegance of grain whiskey without the usual detractors, which again are those
mhm.
kind of weird plasticky notes.
All right. Let's move on to wisdom. See if we all feel a little wiser after trying this one. I guess we could make some wiserhood jokes about this one, I'm sure. Oh man, there's a note in here. It reminds me of Saskatoon berry pie, very specifically Saskatoon berries.
Yeah, there's a lot of pastry too, isn't there?
Oh yeah. Let me put this guy up on the screen. Yeah, for a minute there, I'm like, oh, there's a berry fruit pie here, but I can't think of what it is. But the
I was gonna say it has that red fruit note that usually makes me think like red wine cask.
mhm. So what have we got here? We've got 50.1%. Um, I believe this time it is proper blended whiskey. 654 bottles. So they obviously did a decent size release. I suppose the other thing we could mention about that is La Maison du Whisky is not just a single retailer, but they also redistribute throughout um, Europe and in some cases even further abroad, as they did here in this case, coming all the way to Canada. So this is primarily Highland blended malts.
Oh,
It
Andrew,
also,
how many people in this tasting do you think have been to La Maison de Whiskey? I'm gonna guess at least half.
oh, that's a good question. I mean, we could maybe add that to the poll at the end if you remind me. I know at least one person along with myself has been to La Maison de Whiskey, who's on here, but and they have multiple locations, so you have to make sure that you agree to meet at the correct La Maison de Whiskey look. But if you don't, it's like a 15-minute lime bike ride.
Hmm.
So no harm, no foul. So what was I gonna say? So Highland blended malt, in two vintages of the same lowland single grain, um, uh, and a small amount of blended Scotch. Would imagine they mean lowland single grain. They're referring to the ones that were in generosity. Um, well, let's see what we think about this. And what do they say about? Oh, that's just the generic comment for each. I was hoping for more wisdom from this range of whiskeys, but we'll see where we go.
What I really notice about this is, if you ever wanted to explain to someone how like you can get herbaceous notes in whiskey, this is very, very herbaceous.
So Jeff dropping a very controversial remark that Saskatoon berries are inferior to blueberries. And I would agree with you in that I prefer blueberry pie to Saskatoon berry pie, but
The way to disprove that, by the way, if you were ever going to eat one a slice of both in an order, you would always choose the Saskatoon second. Therefore, it is superior.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I
You're
was just
putting
going to say
choices
that
you do
like,
not necessarily agree.
oh, I was just going to say that the nose on this is definitely more Saskatoon than blueberry is my only point.
Yes.
But if
Yeah,
I
it's
had a
tangy.
choice, I'd probably have the blueberry pie.
Yeah, this to me, this whiskey like noses actually more like wine than whiskey in a lot of ways. Like it's very fruity, it's very herbaceous. Like the oaky notes remind me more of like that kind of like new French oak aroma than
It's an interesting comment because yeah, the weight of the weight of that wood, that dark kind of spice, leather, chocolate, tobacco, um,
yeah,
it's
no, it's like red Burgundy.
well, it's reminiscent of like STR casks. Like it's
Yeah,
reminiscent of something like Cavalan Vino, uh, or like, some of the other distilleries like Lindor's Abbey that use STR in some of their releases. It's kind of in that sherry direction, but it doesn't really come across as fully sherried. And we do know that James Saxon likes to use wine casks. I mean,
it does.
that is a direction that he's taken, that whole Crimson cask release that's coming out, which
Mhm.
is both sherry and wine casks, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Yeah, interesting. I mean, there's some things that remind me of that Juveniles release that they did about 5 years ago.
Mhm.
Definitely on the nose, like lots of similarities with that release.
The palate, though, it's almost as if they took Spice Tree, an older version of Spice Tree, and made a blend with it. Because, you
Yeah.
know, maybe it's not wine cask, but there could definitely be some French oak here.
Mhm. I would agree. Yeah, you notice it on like that kind of tingle right on the start of the finish. You get that
Mhm.
spicy tingle, which is always the Compass Box French oak.
It'll be interesting to see when we go back because, on one level, I like the richness of this, but on another, I don't know, for an older, presumably oldish blend, like what do we guess? What are you guessing age here? Like I'm guessing this has got to be late teens or early 20s
Yeah,
age.
I mean, based on the taste, like I would be guessing kind of close to that 15-year range, I think.
Yeah. It's just, I think that spice and that wood is just a little too much for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like it's covering something.
Hmm. Okay.
Hmm.
Fun nonetheless. Any speculation? I mean, this is blended malt or Highland blended malt. Um,
Yeah, by the way, if anyone does want the exact recipe of these, it's quite easy to get. You know, you can email the hello@compassboxwhiskey.com. They'll send you the exact recipe. I actually, a couple days ago, I thought about doing it, and I just thought, you know what, I actually don't want to know because, you know, being in the role that I'm in, I obsess about the ingredients of these things. I kind of wanted to just taste them without knowing.
well, and my excuse will be that it didn't even occur to me that we could do that, and that makes me feel bad. But
Yeah. I feel like even if you knew, you would wake up tomorrow and, you know, check the US election results and then forget forever what the whiskeys were anyways.
one way or the other, um, one way or the other. Uh, Confidence. Shall we move on to confidence?
Yes.
By the way, I don't, James, since we're on Compass Box, how do you feel about the new website?
Oh yeah, good question. I know. Well, you can still access the old website under a separate link. That's a whole nother topic.
Hmm.
I think yeah, if I'm being honest, I hate it.
Yeah. I mean, technology is cool, and I love some of these touches are really nice, but you get used to something, and like these red screens, as an example,
Yeah.
um, and it's a little, my old brain can't handle it. So,
I think yeah, those of us that are like the whiskey enthusiast types, like we can smell when the marketing starts to like put their boot on top of the head of the whiskey people.
mhm,
Like, and it just smells like that, doesn't it?
mhm. Yeah. All right. Confidence. One thing I wish we'd had here was whatever the like specific note they were trying to achieve in relation to the specific, you know, character trait that Aristotle thought we should have here. Because for the next one we've got, and this one I think is on sale. Let me put it up. So for confidence, we have got Lowland
I'm not sure
single
if they went
grain.
that deep into these, Andrew, if I'm being honest. Like, again, having gone through when I've had people ask for more in-depth information,
Mhm.
I yeah, I don't think that they went quite as deep with these.
In some ways,
Like
that's
they
a little
didn't
bit
try to flesh out the
disappointing.
story like really deep, like they have with some other releases.
So what do we got? Lowland single grain, Northern Highland single malt, two Speyside single malts, one blended malt named the Circle, and confidence reveals a palette of flavors and aromas dominated by the single malts. Okay, well, I don't think we put the ABV on this one.
Yeah, and we don't know which circle it is, but if you know your compass box circles, the first one was based around kind of 16-ish-year-old Tamdu, and the second one was 16-ish Glen Elgin.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that tells you that much.
Well, this to me, I mean, thinking about timelines, like it almost certainly has to be the first release, the Tamdu one.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you were to ask me which one this nosed closer to, I think it would be the second
Hmm.
because it's got that really nice floral, chalky tone to it.
Yeah, the higher strength is noticeable right away.
Mhm. Some nice spices in there, quite peppery.
Yeah. Andrew, how do you feel about the artwork on these bottles?
Uh, I don't love it. Um, yeah, I don't think I love it.
Doesn't it feel specifically like the type of art that if you saw it in person, you'd probably appreciate a lot more, but
Likely,
maybe
yeah.
doesn't like translate great onto a bottle?
But I mean, I think that's true about a lot of these releases in the artist collection that La Maison du Whisky does is,
Mhm.
they're the artwork probably makes sense and looks cool on a painting, but then when you scale it down to a label, I think some of them look fine. You know, one of the things though that I struggle with a lot of these labels is you have two different sides to it. You have the side that tells you what it is. So even with Ben Romick, when I was in Paris for Whiskey Live this year, they did a whole bunch of Ben Romick casks under the artist or
Mm.
bottlings. I'm not sure if they were single casks or bottlings under the artist series.
Yeah, Cat
And
actually brought a sample of them out.
yeah, and you've got the artwork on the one side, but if you want to know what it is, you have to turn it around to the back, presumably, to see that it's Ben Romick and how old it is. And so they're interesting, but I mean, I don't, and they also I feel that those images don't really convey this is a bottle of whiskey to me.
Mm. No, I think that's a totally fair critique.
But maybe the European whiskey consumer has a different perspective on that, and maybe they like the art. So perhaps they're more cultured than I, James. Uh, Palette on this is good. I mean, especially
It's
for the
assertive.
price range. What's that?
It's assertive. I mean, if that's kind of what if that's the takeaway from the naming convention here.
Mm-hmm. So that one makes sense. I'm gonna go back to I don't know. I mean, I suppose you could say that the wisdom smells wise. I mean, I think you need to drink it for the generosity to be generous with you. The nose is a little shy now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good point. I think that this is a confident whiskey, but I don't know, maybe a bit one-dimensional.
Yeah, if you're trying to like pull out what's the thing that you really love about this, I'm struggling a little bit.
Hmm.
It's a little bit easier in the first two for me.
Yeah. it tastes young. It's characterful. It's got a nice balance, but I mean, it's not exciting.
Mhm.
So,
Jeff Siri is interesting. He's saying that, you're paying a little bit for the artist commission. Jeff, I will say that might not necessarily be true. I've been involved with some artist label projects in the past, and sometimes the artist is not in this type of project, is not necessarily looking to kind of cash in. It's
exposure.
it's more the exposure, absolutely,
Yeah.
and exposure to a new market.
Well, they're not getting Rothko or something like that to do the labels.
No,
So,
like for instance, we did a wine label with Susan Point, who takes big commissions for like big public projects in Western Canada,
mhm,
and she did a wine label for us for just some modest amounts of product. So it was fun.
mhm. All right, are you ready for Fortitude?
Yes.
I'm of all the ones we've tried so far, and I've only just nosed it. This one feels like it's going in the right direction for me.
Yeah, I
Uh,
was gonna say, like instantly it's like, oh, thank God.
yeah, I mean, this is going in the direction of, and I know it'll say this on the page when I put it up, but it's going in the direction of things like No Name or Flaming
Yes.
Heart, or like, one of the like more rare bottlings of Peat Monster.
Yeah, and this is to me one of the more interesting spots that Compass Box explores, which is, the idea of taking old Isla whiskey and blending it into grain is like kind of a lost idea in today's
Mhm,
whiskey market. And like Compass Box has done it like so well in a few select occasions over the years.
mhm. I think this one delivers. I mean, it's definitely more in that No Name like vein than it is in the something like or sorry, Flaming Heart. It doesn't have like that spiciness there, but
No, it reminds me a lot of I guess No Name 2 probably.
mhm.
I mean, it'd be tough until you put them side by side, but
Well, it makes you wonder like which specific uh although I seem to remember something about this one. I think this is No Name 1 that they used in this, and I think it is Ardbeg, but to your point, it does come across a bit more Kalila-esque than it does
yeah, it
Ardbeg
totally does.
on the nose and palate. Yeah, it's kind of there's a simplicity to it that's kind of nice where
Mhm.
um it's delivering, kind of what I want it to and maybe not much more, but yeah, I think it's got a nice balance.
Yeah, maybe the closest comparable in this lineup is going to be the Flaming Heart, but
Mhm.
yeah, how do you know?
So, would you describe this whiskey as being brave or courageous?
Well, in the whiskey business, there's nothing I would argue less brave than flouting Isla whiskey.
Hmm. Well,
Takes the least amount of effort. That's the old push the ball downhill
right.
method.
Well, I think that kind of, for me, sort of ticks all the boxes.
Yep.
So interesting to kind of go through those. I mean, they're quite different. I know there's a fifth release that we don't have here that just never made it to the market. Um, uh, which on one level would be kind of fun to try, but we finally got these four tasted and sampled, and that's something.
Yep.
So let's move on now. What do we got next? White Heather?
Yep.
White Heather 21 year. Now, James,
Yes.
I've tried these before. I think they're great. Um, the 21 especially, but the 15 is there. You know, like
By the
you're
way, we should note that the fifth one was called Wonder, and it would have been about $600.
right. Well, far be it from us to make that or be an obstacle to including it in the tasting. But actually, that makes me kind of want it more now because it was probably something more along the lines of like Velacor or,
Yeah,
you know,
like it might actually be like $1,200 worth of whiskey
it
hiding
better
in
not
there.
be like Tobias and the Angel because then I'll be like really disappointed that we didn't get to try it. Um, so
It's
where I was
it,
going to,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
That's the comparable that I've heard is Tobias with Wonder.
Dude, all right. Next time I go to London, I'm going to ask James to find a sample of it.
Yeah.
I can try it. Um, Before we move into this next one, James, you're wearing two hats here. You're a whiskey enthusiast, but you are also the agent for Glenallachie and therefore White Heather. And it's an interesting
Yeah.
project as the Lum Reek is, but I mean, we can sample it, but one question I would ask you about it is there a market for the product or is it a product in search of a market?
Yeah. Okay. So I definitely have thoughts about this now. Selling this type of whiskey and experiencing the kind of, range of market conditions we've had in the 15 years I've been selling Scotch. There's always kind of been this narrative out there that the public palate is going to kind of evolve and allow space for like new things like White Heather and Lum Reek.
Hmm.
I don't think that's happened at all. I think that that's a losing battle.
Yeah.
I would actually say that that was kind of in general the Scotch business swung and missed, and maybe it's because the quality of single malts just kept getting higher and wider in terms of the
Hmm.
offerings,
Hmm.
and it you know as much as we thought like, hey, this would usher in like these windows for products like this, it actually just crowded them out even further. I kind of feel like so there's no doubt that this type of product offers value,
Hmm.
but it doesn't seem to thrill people.
No. Well, and I suppose at what point does presumably, and I know we put it in there just so people know the association, but at what point does the idea that someone's taking 21-year-old Glenallachie and putting it into the blend, raise the question of, well, why did you do that when you could have just sold it as single malt?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm gonna guess there's a few layers to this. So for people that don't know the context, basically, um, I mean, yeah, White Heather was, I think it was a top five selling blended Scotch SKU in the UK, like up until the late 60s. Like it was a big, excuse me. Um, yeah, it basically the base of the blend, I think at its heyday was Aberlour. Like that was kind of one of the main components. And that's how it
mhm,
ended up in the Chivas portfolio. And then when this was one of like the key reasons that they built Glenallachie in the first place was to backfill White Heather when Aberlour single malt started to take off. So I think White Heather at some point was kind of retooled when the sales started to drop. They kind of tweaked it and repositioned it, and they basically went out of business. So I think they tried to go more premium with it, and it didn't work.
mhm,
But like Billy essentially just like inherited the brand almost by accident when he purchased Glenallachie. But if you think about his history, like he worked in the lab at Ballantyne's. Like those guys always, like you've met enough of those Scotch people, like they
mhm,
always want to create good blends. That's always their dream.
mhm. Are
So
you
I don't think
saying
like he was going to make this no matter what anyone told him he could or couldn't do.
are you saying that Richard Patterson doesn't want to travel around the world with a big watch and tie, selling Methuselah Sherry Finesse Delmore? He really just wants to blend.
Well, I'm sure you've read his book, obviously, right? Goodness knows.
Yeah,
Did you not read the book and then compare that? I mean, yeah, I've been fortunate. I've spent days out on the road with Richard in my car. Like who he is in the book and who he is like in front of a crowd is two very different people.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, of
Well, you're forced to put on a persona, and um, in that case, he is a very good showman. So
course.
one of the best, much as like a guy like Jim McEwen was an incredible showman.
Yeah,
How good a blender he was is a different matter. I mean, there's some diverging opinions on that. Um,
totally.
but
Yeah,
so
the devil's advocate view would be that, even if your goal is to create the kind of most drinkable and mass marketable product, that in and of itself is its own unique challenge.
Hmm.
And boy, have they ever stepped up to meet that one. Like
Yeah.
there's other people that have tried to do that and done it less successfully.
Hmm. It's a fair point. So back to White Heather. Billy Walker buys Glenallachie, inherits the White Heather brand, decides to bring it back. We have to assume that well, you would know the quantities on them are fairly small. Like this is not something that they're all in on. Like they're putting
No,
everything into it.
no, it's I think essentially what this is a way to essentially showcase older grains that were in the warehouse when they bought the distillery.
Hmm.
I think that's really what this comes down to. Do I think that they like half-assed it and kind of like pushed out the door? No, I don't think if they didn't think it was a good product, I don't think Billy
Yeah.
like they're doing fine. He doesn't need this, but um,
So back to the whiskey, 47%. It's blended and then married in a PX or in PX Oloroso and Virgin Oak casks.
mm,
That Billy Walker recipe.
yep,
47% high malt content, and then bottled at 48. The one comment that I'd have on this is like, why the virgin oak? Like, I think, and I know why they do that with the rest of the range, but I kind of feel like there's, as much as you've added something, there's something lost here too.
yeah. Something that I've picked up in kind of the methodology at Glenallachie is they inherited so much whiskey that was in tarred wood, and they kind of like they get a lot of these virgin oak casks from their one supplier of wood that they have. And if you've been there, you've seen like giant stacks of like all sorts of unique types of virgin oak from different sources. Actually, a lot of it from like Eastern Europe. And I think like essentially like their plan was to take a lot of this tired whiskey and kind of like flash it in these virgin oak for like short periods and
Mhm,
then use that cask that had was basically flashed with old whiskey to fill with new make.
mhm.
So it's a way to kind of almost like rinse them. And I think that's what's happened here.
Okay. I mean, it tastes fine, but like just going from memory here, like the Cadenhead seemed a bit more lively and a bit more fun and a bit more funky. And this is just like it seems more cask driven. It's more like sherry layered on top, virgin oak layered on top, and it's
Yep.
good. It's just, I mean, I guess my perspective on this is if you're creating a blend to appeal to people that like what you're doing with Glenallachie with like big sherry, why not just bottle more Glenallachie?
Yeah, that's a good takeaway. I think like, when I'm in a position where I drink a lot of Glenallachie. Someone once shared a tasting note that Glenallachie, I think actually it might have been Evan that said, Glenallachie has like the nature of Glenallachie is basically one note. Like it's kind of that like fruity note, right? That you always get at the front of the palate. But
Yeah.
that one note is like pretty delicious. So
Mhm.
why not just lean into that? And that's what they do, right? That's what the 12 and 15 and 18 and 10 are.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, like I taste this and I'm like, you can taste the Glenallachie. Like it's got that upfront fruity palate
Mhm.
character. But like, yeah, you're right. Like, what else is it bringing to the table? Like,
It
yeah,
to me, it's almost like you're diluting Glenallachie with a bit of grain whiskey and calling it a blend.
yeah,
And maybe you can sell it at a little bit better price. But I guess it just begs the question, why? Like if you don't have enough 21-year-old Glenallachie to bottle as it is,
yeah.
why are you putting any into this?
So the question would be is if we put this beside the 18-year-old, like I would probably 9 times out of 10 want the 18 for the same price. But
Right.
there probably is some people out there that would prefer this.
Hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, it's not Glenallachie drinkers,
No.
probably.
But to go back to it, I think it's good.
Yeah.
But what are the comparables for this? Things like that Dewar's double double range. And, you know,
Yeah.
in some of those cases, probably because you've got a narrower range of products being blended here. I don't know, maybe that's the miss for me is that you don't have enough components to make
Yeah.
this truly exciting.
Yeah. Another thing about Glenallachie too, and someone that might be into this is, a lot of people that drink Glenallachie it's kind of like the opposite style of like the Cadenhead's Enigma, right? It's like Billy Walker whiskeys always have a lot of wood influence, and there's a lot of people that like that's what they want all the time.
Sure. They want color, they want
Yeah,
richness.
they want the texture. It's like someone who like drinks California wine all the time, and then you give them like something like French and subtle, and they're just like, this tastes like water, right? And that happens to, I think a Glenallachie drinker falls into that bucket a little bit.
Hmm. Hmm. Shall we on to the McNairs?
Yep.
Um, so one, James, you and I have talked about this range many times over the years. And I'll be one of the first people to admit every time I try these whiskeys, I think they're great.
Hmm.
But again, it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole or vice versa. Like there's something
Yeah.
off about.
Well, especially with the 12 and the 21. Um, the 10 I think is pretty spectacular, and for what you pay, like I don't have a single critique of the 10-year-old cast strength,
Mhm.
because they're at least like, they've taken some, really all they've done here is the same as White Heather, but instead of adding grain, you've added Kalila and Lafroig
Mhm.
in some sort of way, shape, or form. Um, which, yeah, nothing wrong with that. Lots of sherry influence in the full range. But yeah, the 10-year-old at cast strength, like that makes a bit more sense to me. But yeah, you're right, it's good whiskey. You're right. It just feels like it's aiming for a niche that doesn't exist.
Mhm. Well, and I think that's become increasingly apparent in a market where you've got like oversaturation. And so then how do you get attention? I mean, this is something you probably and the brand probably could have gotten away with a lot more easily 4 or 5 years ago when everything's on the up, there's not enough supply, and you know, people are looking for options. And that period is kind of gone. Um,
Yeah, that's a good
I
point.
see you're commenting on that, the rum. Um, we set that up. I don't think we've brought it in yet, partly because a lot of things came at the same time. But
Yeah, I mean, look, McNair's the White Heather McNair's thing. We all know that Billy like always loves to do these experiments, and to me, like Mikeltor was a home run experiment, but these experiments are kind of, they're not as thrilling.
no, they're not thrilling. But I mean, the palate on this one I think is great. Like this is
Yeah.
easily one of the best whiskeys in the lineup so far tonight.
Yeah,
Like
I,
if
I was gonna say if this was in my shelf, I certainly would never, like, I wouldn't ignore it.
yeah, it's not an everyday dram for me, but I mean, this is to go to those stereotypes. This is a classic, like cold winter night dram.
Hmm.
It's got all those things that would kind of be nice, but it's also got some complexity to it. I love like that oiliness, that medicinal note that's creeping in from the Lafroig, balanced out with the sherry. I mean, it's very well done. I wonder too, James, like, would something like this have been more successful if it was branded differently?
Okay,
We,
that is my next topic for sure, is that like the marketing on this was awful. I mean, that's got to be Billy's legacy at the end of this. You go through his history, like think of all the whiskeys that he's had the hand in, like from start to finish.
Mhm.
Deanston, I'm going to say it, terrible packaging. The original
Yeah.
Ben Riach. Bottle was wonderful, but the branding and packaging awful. Glendronach. Yes, we grew to love it, but trust me, as someone who sold it in the early days, people hated the packaging. Like he's got a long history of bad packaged product.
Well, I want to just put this one up for a moment because I mean, this was a previous incarnation of the packaging, and
Oh, I've got a bottle on my shelf, I think, Andrew.
that's good because oh, here we go. I got it. I've got James. I can save you from digging.
I got
So,
it.
like, I
It's
mean,
Canadian money. Oh yeah, nice. Yeah, that's better.
like, no disrespect to
It's
whomever
Harvey.
this gentleman is. No one wants to see his face. Like,
Yeah, it's strange. It's pretty strange. I should mention too that the whiskeys in the first batch were not at the same quality as these later ones.
mhm. Well, I mean, that's part of that. It would be Billy's had more time with the distillery and the stocks, more time to re-rack. Yeah, and as Hunter points out, it's nowhere near as bad as the Glen Scotia Space Cows
Mhm.
or the what were they? It was the Inchmirren.
Yes, with the
Like
Northern
they
Lights on
had
it.
deer that looked like elk on bottles that looked like they belonged in a Banff tourist trap.
I kind of
Um,
wish I had one of those Glen Scotia cows now, just for the sake of having it on the
oh,
shelf.
well, it's funny, and Hunter might have been there when I had the meeting with Andrew Gray from or well, formerly Bricklady, but he was with Glen Scotia at the time, and he came in and he's like, "How are the Glen Scotias doing?" And I was like, "Well, people like the liquid, but the packaging is awful. They hate it." And he's like, "But it was the first ever silk, like triple silk screening of a bottle." I'm like, "Dude, no one cares. They're ugly. Like the technical merits of how you made them look that way is irrelevant." But there were some good whiskeys in there, like the 16-year-old especially I remembered was
Yeah, I
especially
like the
good.
18.
But yeah, the packaging on those was famously bad. Um, and that was at a point when like people wanted like their grandfather,
Oh,
Doug's got
God,
it.
I'm jealous. He's got an 18 in his hand, the red one.
People wanted their like
Oh, it's
grandfather style
21.
whiskey bottles. Yeah. Anyway, I think this Lum Reek is great. It's a great product. But yeah, I think the branding is still a struggle. And you know, if I were ever asked for my honest feedback, I'd be like, find another way to brand it. Like, get rid of Lum Reek. Like, the name isn't really for people who aren't going to dig very far. And let's be honest, most consumers are not going to dig far. They don't care that the like that word reek is a reference to burning peat. Like it's
No.
in places like Canada and the US, it just it sounds bad. Doesn't sound good.
So, Andrew, I was in a tasting once with a club, and it was one of those tastings where like the samples are 1 ounce and these
Mhm.
ones were at the end. And people started going on like AI image generators and creating and just asking it to create a label for a whiskey called McNair's. And like the chat was just filled with all these whiskey labels. There were every single one of them was better.
I bet Doug and Jeff are already working on that right now. Doug's nodding.
That's the thing, right? Just calling it like literally just McNair's, not the McNair's, just McNair's. You could put
Yeah.
McNair's 21 on like a nice,
That's
like make it look
right.
like 120-year-old kind of like turn of the century style bottle, and people would have bought
Perfect.
that.
Yeah. Something from the Belle Epoque.
Yeah.
Get rid of the dude with the red nose that looks like he's only got a few years left.
Yes. I
And
remember this
the
tasting,
reek.
someone said he looks like a molester.
Well,
I mean,
anyway,
I don't agree, but
no.
if if
I mean,
if a
the
customer
reality
says
is
that to you,
the reality is like marketing companies get paid good money to come up with these designs, a lot of which are terrible. And, you know, ultimately people want the whiskey. James, I'm sure I told you the story, but I remember the Victoria Whiskey Festival shortly after Billy bought Glenallachie, and one of his business partners was Gordon and Ali Stevenson's father. And I remember cornering those guys in the bar and giving them unsolicited advice, as one does. I told them, I said, my hopes for Glenallachie were that you guys would take tall, round bottles and just bottle your whiskey with like a good enough label, but be the people's whiskey. Like you're just going to bottle whiskey that's good. You're not going to invest in marketing. You're not going to put it in boxes or tubes. You're just going to be the guys that put things out in tall round bottles with a cool label, and it's good value whiskey at a good price. And I mean, they even if they took said advice back, I'm sure probably wouldn't have been well received in that era of the industry. But like, good Lord, I wish one distillery would just do that because I would throw my weight behind them on
Mhm.
that. Like, don't buy the bespoke bottle that costs like $5 a unit and put it in like
Yeah.
packaging that's going to get thrown away the second they open it.
Oh, it's funny you should say that, Andrew, because I actually had a conversation today with one of my whiskey suppliers that's looking to do exactly that and create like a second label where they can just
Hmm.
create value whiskeys in simple packaging.
I believe I know who you're speaking of, but I won't
Yeah,
say anything.
yeah, we can hope.
Oh, Jeff's got an early, he's got a McNair's. I love it. It looks like something
Canadian whiskey.
it's we Aussie. there's some incredible spelling on that. It looks like something that Wiser's would have put out in a
And
Playboy
1982.
magazine in the 80s. It's got just the right color tones there. Oh,
Yeah,
Doug.
see, there you go. That's
Oh,
the right idea.
nice. There's three tall grain silos that look like stills. I mean, without a line arm. That's
Mhm.
pretty interesting. I like that. I like the busyness of that.
Well, I'm sure that, by the way, looks very much like Stranger and Stranger design. I'm sure you've noticed, Andrew, that sometimes there's whiskeys that come out with like Stranger and Stranger's better work, and the products are successful immediately because of that packaging.
Hmm.
Like Temple whiskey comes to mind as an example of that.
Shall we move on to Flaming Heart? We've been dwelling on the failings of Billy Walker, which is probably not that charitable of us to
You know
do.
what? People love to bash Billy Walker. I think that's a compliment that people like to bash him.
Well, I think, but I mean, I think our my speak for myself here points here are in no ways demeaning the man or what he's done. Because I still think that Lum Reek 21 might be one of, if not the best whiskey in the lineup tonight.
Yeah.
But the packaging is and the branding, it's got to change. Anyway,
It's
uh,
it's probably not going to continue,
yeah,
is what I would guess.
fair. Flaming Heart, James. This is what, the fifth release of Flaming Heart or sixth?
But, seventh,
Seventh.
I think.
Seventh release. It's the one with the baby kiss angel on it.
Yeah. I know this. Yeah, this always. You probably noticed there's a lot of people in the whiskey game that have like affinity with this type of music.
Yeah.
Like there's little cues on here to like all sorts of heavy metal bands.
So what do we got here, James? Tell us about the seventh release of Flaming Heart.
Yeah, the idea of Flaming Heart is always to showcase Highland malt with Islay malt done in French oak. That's the kind of three piece, right? John always had this idea that you get this holy trinity of three components, right? So like his original one was that Daluin and Kleinleash and Tiananik were like this holy trinity that when you mix them together, they always worked. And one of his other ones was that Kalila and Kleinleash and French oak just so he loved to play around with that idea. Um, every Flaming Heart would have kind of a different twist on it, but they always were kind of like older Kalila and Kleinleash as a base. This one definitely falls into that. The twist for this one is there's Lafroig in it, which there'd never been Lafroig before.
Yeah. Sorry to
I
diverge
know
for a
there's so
second,
much going on.
but I love Chris and Sarah's McNair's label with the date, the year 19,023, which that's an incredible date. I mean, I hope any brand has that longevity, but also point out that Sammy's put the Spotify playlist for Flaming Heart, if I'm
That's
not
amazing.
mistaken.
Oh yeah, they have a new AI playlist
Yeah.
feature.
But
By the way, the language on that label is fantastic. There's even like a little like what looks like an apostrophe after the first two letters. It's like they've created their own version of Gaelic.
yeah, Nano Warne Folly. I mean,
Kind
incredible.
of has like a Welsh feel almost, doesn't it?
I mean, at what point does the internet break us? I think is the
Yeah,
question that
when we
I
have
have.
chips in our brains.
We can't be far away from the point where the Jeff says 10 years ago. That's probably fair. My dad keeps railing on about social media, and he's not wrong, but like it's not going anywhere.
No.
So anyway, I mean, the Flaming Hearts have been my favorite, probably my favorite ongoing release from Compass Box for a long time.
Yeah.
Um, you know, maybe not so much this one, but a lot of the earlier ones I felt were like, I don't think consciously, but I think the style that came across from them reminded me of young Port Ellens. And that
Yes.
was something that I used to say to John. I thought that like all these Flaming Heart releases, whether intentionally or not, the profile he created me reminded me of Port Ellen when it was in its like teens and like late mid to late teens. And uh yeah, I think it's still a great series. You know, there's been some ups and downs in them, but I think they've been consistently pretty good releases over time.
Yeah, one of the takeaways, I mean, I did so many Flaming Heart tastings over the last 2, 3 years where we tasted this versus other batches because people have them in their collections, right? Especially there's not many people that have bottles older than the 2012. I know Doug's about to go and get like the
Yeah.
2007 and 2009. I'm sure that he's got bottles. But you know, people kind of have this idea that like no, the 2012 and the 2015 are like the best ones. Boy, I did a lot of tastings where we did them blind. I this edition like consistently won the most votes at like
Mm.
tasting after tasting. Um, yeah, I think like James Saxon's style kind of like definitely has taken this in a divergent direction. Like it's a little bit more exotic and upfront than previous editions. And I
Yeah.
think that it's like it's a bit more showy. In a way, it's like more Glen Alecky-esque than previous editions.
It what about the spice profile? Do you think that's kind of come down on this release?
Well, I know like they use more French oak on this, I think,
Mm.
than even previous batches. Like they ramped it even up higher.
Hmm. Damn,
I
that's
love it. I mean, it's got lots going on.
it really does. That's a strong contender. All right. Uh James, we got to do our speed rounds.
Yes.
Um Before we do that, I'd sort of suggest to you to remind me there was an extra question. Oh, do we want to put into the questions an extra question? Um, who's been to La Maison, or was there a different question that we wanted to
Oh
ask?
yeah, who's been to La Maison? I'm also curious before we do the speed round, if anyone has done. So I'm looking at you know, Gordon Phil wants me to come out next summer. I'll probably gonna go back and when they reopen their shop. And one of the things I want to do, I want to get back to Campbelltown. I want to do the Cadenhead's blending experience. Have you done it?
No, Doug might have done it. I wouldn't be surprised if he has.
Yeah.
Doug, there he goes. Of
Well,
course.
did someone put in ChatGPT like to create a like idealized whiskey enthusiast, and that's just the stream coming from Doug's camera?
Probably, yeah.
It's incredible.
Well, James, if you do that, if you're gonna go over, let me know
That's what
because
I'm thinking of going, Doug.
yeah, yeah. Let me know because I'd be interested to go and do something like that because it's kind of hard to justify a trip to Campbellton. But um,
Yeah, well, now that I'm representing Kilcoman, that's the onus, right? Is to go to Campbellton and then jump over.
yeah. Well, Doug will be at whiskey school, so we can go and take photos, gawk at him as tourists while he's rolling casks and such around the distillery. Uh, all right. So my one idea on this, if he's willing, was going to be for the speed round's always fun if there's more than a couple of people. Thought maybe we would invite Hunter. Hunter, do you want to join us for the speed round? You have the ability to unmute yourself if you do.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
All right. For those who don't know, Hunter used to work at the store for many years, was referred to as my work son at one point in time. Um, but he's returned from a dalliance out on the East Coast and now is living in a dark hovel somewhere from what we can tell.
Yeah, I've
But
been living under a bridge for a while. Finally got a little room here.
there you go. Well, it's good.
Yeah,
It's good that you got a room.
my Sith layer is coming together.
It looks like you have a comfy chair though. So
Yeah, behold, this
yeah,
is the reaping of benefits here in BC.
there you go.
1970s chair.
All right, so Hunter, here's how this goes. We're going to go through the whiskeys one last time, quick last impressions, and then we have a vote. So starting with Hunter, did you create a label as well too?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's yeah, brace yourself.
Oh, flaming farts. Uh, yeah, it's pretty good. I like that. I like that.
Thanks, Ed.
Well done. All right, so we got to keep this show on the road. So we're going back to the Enigma 25-year-old. Final impressions of it, nose and taste. Hunter, if you're ahead of us, what do you think of this one?
Oh, I thought the Enigma was awesome. Like you guys were talking about earlier, it harkened back to what I remember from blends like a decade ago when we were picking them up from random stores around town, and it actually kind of reminded me of that Black Bull. You remember
Oh,
from way back?
you mean the one we liberated from Co-op and sold
Yeah,
to a well-known Calgary property developer?
they're charming bottles, man. And this one actually, it's got a lot of charm to it. It's really pretty. It's really cool.
No, I agree. I like it. It's got a nice elegance to it. It's a little understated, but dollar for dollar, I think it's good value. James?
Yeah, the air has been kind to it too. It's added extra layers sitting here.
Yeah. It's making me think
Always a good sign.
if I needed another bottle, which I don't, that I would grab one, but I probably shouldn't. All right, what about generosity? Has time been generous to this whiskey? Hunter, we'll kick it off with you again.
I actually love this whiskey. I think this whiskey's amazing. I only have reminiscences now because it's been so long since I've been in the industry. But this one reminds me of the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society early grain releases. I was thinking like Girvan, back in the day. Those like really
Mm.
kind of toffee heavy, kind of crispy style sweets. Very pretty, very elegant, really fun actually.
It reminds me of chewing on a plastic straw back when we were allowed to have such things. Just if you're bored and you're kind of like working on the McDonald's straw in your mouth.
There's also some like weird cologne tones in there that I think are kind of neat.
Okay.
They're like
Do
a
James?
you like
Trojan
those
man,
notes, Andrew?
and
Do you
then
like
What's
those
that?
green whiskey notes?
Sorry, what was the question, James?
Do you like those plasticky green whiskey notes?
I don't mind them at times as long as they're in balance, including,
Totally.
with some Loch Lomond whiskeys, like when you get the plastic wires on fire, like I kind of dig that. I mean, I know in real life, if I'm smelling or tasting that, it's probably not good for my health, but in whiskey, it's probably no worse for my health than the other whiskey. But yeah, I don't mind it from time to time, but yeah, it just, that's what I find this whiskey is very plasticky, but not in a bad way. All right. Wisdom. Are we any wiser for this one? Plastic
yeah.
Wires on Fire is Doug's favorite band. Doug, I expect to see a ChatGPT created album cover based on Plastic Wires on Fire. James, what do you think about Wisdom?
Yeah, it's first of all, I don't know if I would guess this was a blend. It tastes very malt forward to me. Um, yeah, it's lovely. It's got kind of a good mix. It's a little bit cast forward from my liking. Feels like it's been disguised a bit. Again, that red fruit thing kind of comes out.
Do you suspect there's a decent amount of Balmenic in this? Possibly,
A
maybe.
good question.
Hunter, what do you think of this one?
I gotta say, these all remind me of like being bombarded in like in the Bay, the perfume department.
Mm.
I think this one in particular is like, yeah, it's pretty. I like it. I don't know if like maybe my inexperience is showing nowadays, but I think it's got some cool elegance to it. I don't know about the price points on these guys, but they're
Yeah.
tasty. I think they're neat. They're cool experiments.
So, Hunter, the modern equivalent of this in Calgary, because I don't know if anyone really goes to the Bay anymore, is the Shoppers Drug Mart at Chinook Center, where if you want to go buy something, you have to walk through the perfume department just to get to the main part of the store. And it is terrible. But there's
Yeah,
plastic
I do
wires
love
on
it.
fire. Oh man.
During the gauntlet of perfume, salespeople. They think I hate it, but I love staying there for hours on end.
The those album covers, Doug, make me think of like the third episode of the Matrix series. Like They're going to dark places. La Maison du Whisky Confidence. How's this one showing? It's very, very like vanilla, kind of doughy floral now.
Yeah, it's softened a little bit. I found it a little bit aggressive the first time around.
You know, the palate though is still, I mean, it's not over the top, but it's very toasty.
Yeah.
The wood grain on this is quite prominent.
Yeah, I don't like when, in general, when whiskeys have that like flash of heat on the like on the palate like that on the finish. But
So,
yeah.
Hunter, you have a younger, more delicate palate.
Yeah, my years are becoming me. I don't actually. Yeah, I didn't find the confidence to be a lot to my liking. I just, it's nice. It's fine. It feels youthful, like you guys were talking about, though. I got the same kind of experience of being like very heated. It's very alcohol forward, and almost it feels like there's something in there that's like kind of disjointed, but it's still cool.
Yep. Doug's saying, love the nose. Palate doesn't entirely live up. I agree with that. All right. Fortitude. This one may have grown on me a little bit on the nose.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's interesting coming back to this now after having Flaming Heart. Yeah, I mean the nose on this is wonderful. It doesn't have the depth on the palate that Flaming Heart does.
I mean, it doesn't have the spice for sure, but it's very doughy. There's lots of fruit, like apples, pears, melons. In some ways, I like the freshness of this, but
Yeah.
yeah, I got to try Flaming Heart one more time to see how this stacks up. But I would say this is still confidently for me my favorite of that La Maison de Whiskey range. Hunter?
I fell in the first pass. I was kind of impressed by it. It's been a while since I've had a peated whiskey, so I felt like I was like a virgin again. I was like,
Hunter,
wow,
that is a bold statement that needs to be addressed and corrected. It's been a while since you've had a peated whiskey.
for shame. I know it hurts to say it, but it's true.
Yeah. You're one of history's greatest monsters. I had no idea. But it's written, the record is there for all to see. Hunter, please tell me this isn't just because you've gone down a bourbon rabbit hole.
No, it was an era of I used to be part of the whiskey 1%, and now I'm part of the whiskey hoi polloi. So it's
Oh, there you go.
oh, here we go.
Was that because of your dalliance with the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation?
Well, yeah, you might imagine. Things have changed, and see, I never realized that working at a place like the wine market was kind of like a supplementary, wage by getting, access to beautiful things. So you just don't realize it.
All
Whiskey
right.
socialism doesn't work. You might say it works on paper. It doesn't work in.
Well, I mean, Hunter, you were the prototypical whiskey socialist as
Mhm.
opposed to champagne socialist back in the day. So, all right, where are we here? We're on to the Glenallachie White Heather 21 year. The
I got
notes,
to quickly add before we move on,
yeah.
if you read the Surge review, I'm now obsessed with getting a bottle of this Wonder, the fifth one. His review, he describes it as apparently the recipe for Wonder, because Compass Box, of course, reveals all the recipes, is great plus great equals best.
Wow. James, you've now got me. By the way, don't go onto Whiskey Fun and just type Wonder because you first have to click Whiskey Fun search. Otherwise, you get the movie Wonder, which I believe is about a boy who is badly burned and wants to be an astronaut or something, which I'm sure is a charming movie, but it's not the image you want when you type that into the search on Whiskey Fun. James, when was that review from?
Well, 2021.
I think I found it. Yeah. So anyway, Yeah, you've got me intrigued about this one now too. How does one go about finding this other than overpaying for it from a European retailer?
Yeah, you hope it comes up at auction. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Well, we started talking about Glenallachie White Heather 21,
Yeah.
and then you went down the Surge rabbit hole. What do we think about the White Heather before we move on?
Yeah, again, it's fun and fruity Glenallachie. I don't have a ton to say about it if I'm being honest.
Yeah. No, I mean that I think that's the unfortunate thing about it is like it's good, but it's not exciting for what it is. And I think that it's one of the products. I mean, you and I have talked about this before, maybe not always on a tasting. There are a number of brands out there that seem to be trying to create a market for something that doesn't exist.
Mhm.
And I think that that's a difficult position to be, and probably not the right price point. I mean, especially when you have something like that Cadenhead Enigma 25 as a comparable, admittedly a limited edition one-off, but you know, pricing blends as single malts, comparably aged single malts is probably not a good strategy.
Look, we all have this thought in this market is that somehow, pricing pressure doesn't drive us back to 2019 levels, but drives us back to like 2007 levels.
Yeah.
And that's, products like this, when you taste it, you start to think like, I mean, maybe that's what it's going to take.
Mm-hmm. Uh, McNair's 21. Hunter, any thoughts? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, it was something.
Is this
Yeah.
because you can't handle the peated malts anymore?
Yeah, like I said, I'm back to virginal peated whiskey status, and it's tough. It's tough for me to handle this high heat peat.
Mm-hmm.
No, I found it was fine. I've always thought these McNair's Lum Reeks were kind of weird for their labeling. I didn't quite know what to make of them. It's actually the first one I've had. And it's good. I like it. I just I don't know what to make of these whiskeys because like they seem kind of strange to me with their packaging and their kind of
Mm-hmm.
motifs, but elegant. It's got some cool tones to it. I
Okay.
wish I could say more. I remember I tasted it and I was like, yeah, guys, it's good. It tastes good.
Mhm. Well, I know it's a favorite amongst the staff of the shop. James, any thoughts, more thoughts on the Lumreek?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt it's a solid bottle. Again, I think it's worth a little bit of extra money over White Heather personally, but yeah, I mean, we like to think that the packaging isn't an influence but it just is. Even the bottle shape with that like flat edged bottle with the rim on it,
Mhm.
it just feels wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, the bottle design looks like a second or third tier cognac bottle, like
Mhm.
what you'd expect from like some small farmhouse cognac producer that only releases like, I don't know, 1,000 bottles a year. Um, but what about the price point on it? Because I mean, you know, 270, I know that sometimes it goes on sale, like for comparables, like there's a lot of other things you can get like age statement close to 20 years of age for less than that. And I think that's part of the struggle. And is if they need to hit that price point to justify putting again 21-year-old whiskey in there, it begs the question, why are you using it for that purpose anyway? But anyway,
I think that per James' point too. By the way, like the hope that eventually blends would carve a place out in the market that they would like comfortably sit in and people would be kind of attracted to is a really beautiful idea. I wish it would have come to fruition that people that like are blenders. I'm sure we've all tried it. I know Andrew, you tried it, making your own blends. I don't know if you still do it,
time
but
to
how
time.
fun that was,
Yeah.
and why the magic of making your own blend is so cool. But trying to get people to see the magic when there's such like an excitement around like seeing like specific whiskey terroir, it's hard to kind of pull people away from that.
By the way, I'm convinced that the missing link in people's heads on this idea for the general populace is the idea that all single malts themselves are blends and made up of casks that are different,
Mhm.
and that the casks that are not as good in the warehouse might end up in the single malts as maybe even at a higher rate than they would in a blend is a
Mhm.
very tough concept for people to wrap their heads around.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's the bridge that I've tried to cross, and I see the looks in people's eyes, and I think
Yeah.
they like there's genuinely this belief that somehow, like, even in something like White Heather and Lum Reek, that these are like leftovers,
Yeah.
and
Mm.
it's tough to get over that.
But I mean, I think even for myself, as someone who knows better, and I'm asking the question, why are they doing these?
Yeah,
When I know that like there's not enough 21-year-old to go around in the first place, even for me, it's hard to like ignore that point of view.
totally.
Well, hey, you remember why you made those blends? Like I made them because there was bottles I didn't care that much about anymore that I just didn't, I threw them together. I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be sad about missing this one.
Yeah.
Um,
That's what my tomatin cask is for now, Hunter.
yeah, exactly. And like to Jeff's point, like Compass Box did it and made it work. Like one thing that I think our old colleague, Brian mentioned is that Compass Box has one of the most amazing marketing departments, at least back in the day that I remember.
Yeah.
Like the beauty of their packaging is astounding, and it attracts eyes in ways that almost no other blend can.
Mhm.
No matter what, like you look at,
Yeah.
I remember that 3-year-old deluxe, and that thing was like an astounding piece of art. The no name, all of those stand out in my mind as
Mhm.
like absolutely like great ways to make blends interesting. Blends always try to kind of lean in on single malt style. They always try to kind of like show like, hey,
Mhm.
we're just like the other guys. Compass Box
Mhm.
does something different.
Well, I think that's a fair point, is that, you can create a good product, but the marketing still needs to be there too. And I think both with White Heather and with McNair's, it's a struggle because they're kind of afterthoughts after the main brand. They're not the focus. And like, how do you
Yeah, it
get
almost propagates that idea that I described, that they're leftovers.
exactly? Anyway, well, Hunter, thank you for your contributions to what became not a speed round, but nevertheless, much appreciated to bring you out of retirement for some color commentary. I did remove
Thanks, man.
co-host permission for you though, because that means you get to vote. So I'm going to fire this up now. We actually have 4 questions now. Evan has his cheeky third question. I added a fourth one just for humor's sake to see who's actually been to La Maison du Whisky. Now, James, while everyone's figuring out their votes, um, you know, you and I have to pick our favorites. I'm actually a little torn here in a couple of different directions, but I think I've got mine narrowed down. Um, do you have your favorites good to go by chance?
I know. I want to choose Compass Box Wonder as my number one, but I don't think I'm allowed.
Well, it's not in front of us, so I'd say yes, that is correct. That is not allowed.
Yeah, my number one tonight is going to be Flaming Heart.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know. To be honest, I just love like every single thing about that whiskey.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm gonna give Generosity a slight nose ahead of Fortitude as two and
Oh,
three.
interesting. Okay. Well, there you go. I'm really kind of I feel like I'm sort of torn here because I really wanted to give the Lum Reek some props
It's
in this
close,
race.
right?
It's so close, but uh for me, I'm going to agree with you. I think that Compass Box Flaming Heart really stands out. Fortitude is my second favorite, and bizarrely enough, I'm going to go with Cadenhead Enigma as my third. I like
There
the
you go.
fact that it tastes kind of musty and funky. Um, it just it of all the whiskeys in the lineup tonight, it's the one that actually tastes the oldest to me. Like it just tastes old, possibly a little tired, but a little funky and a little fun.
Tired can be good. That's a good example of when tired actually works.
Hmm. All right, so everybody who's still present, who's not left, uh, has voted. So I'm going to share the results of the voting here. So round one, look at this. Compass Box Flaming Heart is the winner, followed by Fortitude and Wisdom. Round two, more votes. Fortitude, Confidence, and Lum Reek 21 all tied. And then almost everybody else but Wisdom gets a vote that round. And then the follow-up questions, best blender. So this is interesting because I love how Evan doesn't even have the nose on this list, or Dr. Jillian Bumston, as Angus likes to refer to the dual persona of Bill Lumsden and Jillian, I forget her last name, who used to be with Penryn, is now with Glenmorangie. But James Saxon has edged out John Glazer and Billy Walker. It's controversial. And coming in as a dark horse tied for second is Ninja Deluxe Kitchen System with 2.6 liter. Sure.
Oh man.
Yeah. Anyway, who has been to La Maison du Whisky? 2 people. So there you go. You should go to La Maison du Whisky. Maybe don't be shocked by the prices there. They are something else. Think what you pay for whiskey in Canada and double it. And that's about, and maybe more in some cases, what you would pay for it at La Maison du Whisky. But it's France. You get to go to Paris. What's to complain? James, any comments? Anything we need to we haven't addressed before we wrap this thing up?
No, I mean we could we'll save some of our further comments about Compass Box for the upcoming tasting.
Okay.
Because I'm sure there will be some thoughts.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that one. All 4 of the extinct blends in a row should be a good tasting. Tomorrow will be exactly 25 days until Whiskey Advent. So if you haven't bought your Kensington Wine Market, this is not an Advent calendar tastings kit, what we call the full Monty. You've still got time. They are trickling out. We're going to reveal our packaging probably this week too, which hopefully doesn't get us in trouble with the AGLC, but you never know. We are kind of poking them with a stick. Also, dropping tomorrow, we've got our first Millstone single malt cask. It's actually our 3rd Millstone cask, with a painting of the store that may or may not be copyright. We don't. My wife pointed that out to me tonight, but they're already labeled, so there's nothing we can do about it. But it's a lovely Oloroso sherry cask, unpeated Millstone single malt. And there's some other interesting whiskeys dropping tomorrow from Millstone, from Ardbeg, and a few others. So keep an eye out for those in the newsletter. James, thank you for being my co-host tonight for this somewhat unstructured and misdirected tasting that I think was still kind of fun, but you lacked a certain amount of structure. But thank you. I mean, if anyone's fault was mine.
There just wasn't the narrative was tough on this
Tough narrative. It's a tough narrative, but we got Hunter to slow down the speed round for us, so that was a plus. And we did have some creativity in the Chat GPT department, so that was fun. Anyway, well, James, thank you for that. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. Hunter, thank you for joining us for a little bit of this. Sorry we didn't get philosophical enough for your taste, but that's something we could always do in the future. Hope you all have a great night tonight, and hopefully the world is still there tomorrow morning.
Good night.